Good evening, fourth graders. Today's math mini lesson, and tomorrow's actually, are on rounding. So if you would pause the video, label your next page rounding. Actually, I'm going to give you a double title because we're going to use this 2 days in a row. We're going to use two strategies for rounding. We're going to use place value today, and we're going to use number lines tomorrow. So if you want to include both, and you can use this page both today and tomorrow in your notes, so go ahead and pause the video and copy your title now. So you may have noticed in your day-to-day life, when you're at a store, let's say, and something costs, $29, you might notice that a lot of times adults, they don't say it costs $29. You ask them how much it costs, they'll say, oh, it costs $30. Because $29 is really close to $30. So you kind of hear them say, oh, it costs $30. Or, if you're looking at something more expensive, like how much do you have to pay for your car each month, and it's $219. They might say, oh, I have to pay $200 every month for the car. It's not exactly $200, but they tend to say something like that that's near the number, but a round number that just has a lot of zeros in its place values. It's like I remember last year there were 568 students at RD Head. And it seems like whenever you heard anybody say, how many students go to RD Head? People would say, 550 students or 600 students. Some number that's close, but what we would call a round number instead of an exact number. So we're going to look at a couple of strategies today to round some numbers off. So let's see. Let's say I'm going to talk about something that costs $238. So when you round, there's an official way we do it in math, and this will round to a very certain number. But there's a couple of ways we can do it. So first thing that matters is what place are you going to round to? So one thing I can do is I can round this number to what I would call the nearest $100, or the nearest 100. And here's how I would do that. I would take my 238, and if I'm rounding to the nearest 100, I'm looking at my hundreds number. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the closest 100 to 238. So the way I'm going to do that with place value is I'm going to look over here. And if I look at that 3, I am closer, that number is below 5. So if I'm below 5, that means this number is closer to 200 than to 300. If I want to go down to 200, I would have to count back to 30, to 20, to 10, 200. If I wanted to go up to 300, I'd have to go more times than that, 240, 250, 260, 270, 280, 290, 300. So by looking at this, if this is 5 or less, the number next to it, not the hundreds, but the number next to it, I'm looking at that 3. If that's 5 or less, I'm going to round down, we call it. I'm going to round that number down to 200. And if that number is, if it's 4 or less, I'm so sorry. If it's 5 or more, I'm going to round it up to $300. So I'm rounding to the nearest 100. I find my hundreds. I have 200s. I'm going to look, and 4 or less means round down. So I'm going to take this number. I'm going to round it to $200. When I have rounded to a place, if I round to the nearest 100, if I find my hundreds, everything after the hundreds is zeros all the way across. That's how I know I've rounded it down. Okay, let me do the same example again. Let me round to a different place. Sometimes you will round to the nearest 10. So I'm going to take my $238 and I'm going to round to the nearest 10. So if I round to the nearest 10, I'm looking at my 10. and I'm looking at the number one place down from my tens. So same rule as before, so I'm going to round to this place rather than to this place, round to the tens. Remember I said if it's 4 or less, then I'm going to round down, and if it's 5 or more, I'm going to round up. So I'm looking at if I'm rounding to the tens place, I find my tens place and I'm looking one digit to the right, one digit down from there. So here I'm in this situation where it's 5 or more. So I'm going to round that up. Instead of, my choices here are to round it down to 230 or round it up to 240, because 238 is between 230 and 240. So since I have 5 or more in the ones place, I'm going to round that number up to 240. And if I'm rounding to the nearest 10, everything after my tens place should be zeros, which it is. So I have about $240 is how you would say that. A lot of times people use the word about when they round. Let's do one together. So follow along with me. So you are in school 395 minutes a day. Not sure if you knew that, but a 395 minutes school day. I don't know if that sounds like a lot or not too many. So if you were to tell somebody about how long you're in school, you might not say 395 minutes. You might say some other things. So let's round this, say, to the nearest 100. So if I round to the nearest 100, I'm going to take that digit, find my hundreds. So I already know my answer. If I'm rounding to the nearest hundreds, everything after my hundreds place is going to be zeros when I'm done, right? So what I'm trying to figure out is, do I round this to 300 or do I round it to 400? And to tell, I look one digit to the right of the number I'm using, right? And if it's 4 or less, I'm going to round it down. And if it's 5 or more, I'm going to round it up. So 9 is obviously more than 5. So I'm going to round this 3 up to the next spot. So I'm going to round it up to 400 minutes. And that makes sense, right? You're in school about 400 minutes a day, if I look at that place value. This one is interesting for a we do, because if I do the same thing, and instead of rounding to the nearest 100, I round to the nearest 10. So what I'm going to do is 395. And now I'm going to round to the tens instead of to the hundreds. And I'm going to get an interesting answer, because check this out. So to decide, do I round up or round down? I'm going to look one place to the right, 4 or less, 5 or more. I'm also at 5 or more again, so I would round this 9 up to 10. But since I can't squeeze a 10 into the tens place, that 10 just becomes another 100. And I'm going to round, I have to decide, am I rounding 395 up to 400, because that's the nearest 10 above it, or down to 390. So this 10 is going to become another 1. And I'm going to actually get the same number, 400 minutes, if I round to the nearest 10. So that's an unusual situation, but it does happen sometimes. So 395, what I'm really saying is, am I going to round that to the nearest 10 down to 390 or up to 400? And it turns out I'm going to go up to 400 because of this 5. We will do a couple more when you get to class tomorrow. Have a great night.